and the Maison Van Cleef and Arpels. And thanks to all of you for coming to talk about a subject that we love, sentimental jewels. My name is Paul. I'm a teacher at l'école for 8 years now, art historian, jewelry historian, decorative arts historian, and I'm pleased to be here with Marie-Laure Cassius-Duranton. She has a doubly hyphenated name. Her first name and last name are hyphenated. Just like her background is very complex as well. Marie-Laure is an art historian, a specialist of the Renaissance, Italy. And after that, she went on to do studies in gemology, and she taught gemology for some 10, 11 years, I think, at the Laboratoire Français de
13 years.
13 years.
Already.
And now she's a researcher, teacher at l'École, the School of Jewelry Arts. So we're very pleased to have you and to talk about this interesting topic. But let's have a few words about l'école. What is l'école, Marie-Laure?
Yes, before starting, just want to introduce us, to explain a little bit what we are doing currently at l'école, the School of Jewelry Arts. So it was founded by Van Cleef and Arpels 11 years ago in Paris, with the main goal of sharing knowledge related to jewelry with the general public, and to make people understand that jewelry is art. We have many activities related to jewelry knowledge. In fact, the name is the school, but we are not a school in the traditional sense. That means that you want, if you come to l'école, to the school to attend the class, it's not to become a professional. If you want to become a professional, you have to go elsewhere. But if you want to discover more about jewelry, we are the right place for that. In all our activities, we propose courses that last between 2 and 4 hours. We have a catalogue of 30 different topics currently in Paris. Topics related to savoir-faire. In French, that means craftsmanship, so all the techniques related to jewelry. Art history of jewelry, and gemology, the world of gemstones. And we propose very hands-on courses, practical courses, not academic courses. We want you to live an experience with us when you attend a class at the school. We have a permanent campus in Paris, another one in Hong Kong. This year we will open a third one in Shanghai, in China. And in 2024, we are planning to open a fourth campus in Middle East. We propose many other activities outside the classes. We have a research department. It's important to make research to create new topics for talks, courses. We publish books, articles. We have a library also. It's probably the largest private library dedicated to jewelry in the world. And we propose exhibitions on the different campus, but also in museums everywhere in the world. We have partnerships, for example, with the Natural History Museum in Paris, or with the Museum of Design in Tokyo. And currently we have an exhibition about Chinese gold ornaments in Paris and birds in jewelry in Tokyo. We have workshops for young people, because we like to create vocations very early. And of course, conversations like tonight. And also online conversations since the beginning of the COVID crisis. So, are you ready?
Much.
Let's
yes.
start.
So why are we talking about sentimental jewels? If we click to the beginning of the talk, we wanted to talk about this idea of jewels as a symbol of feelings. It's often secret, often coded. And we thought it's a very universal topic, whether we're talking about ancient Greece, ancient Rome, whether we're talking about medieval jewelry. In fact, we think some of the little sayings on jewelry, love sayings that we're going to talk about today, have their roots in medieval jewelry in France. So we wanted to look at this human experience of jewelry as a token of some kind of feelings. And we're going to do this in two phases. We're going to, three. We love three. We're going to talk about legends of lovers and legends of love and legendary lovers. You're going to recognize some of these love stories, I'm sure. We're also going to talk about the symbolic garden of love. Gardens have always fascinated us. We talked a lot about gardens earlier today. And the symbolic meaning, especially in the Middle Ages, all of the literature, and each flower has its own meaning, its own secret code. And then finally, we're going to talk about the secret language of love, not only through flowers, but through symbols, letters, rebuses, any way that somebody can transfer a message through a jewel. We're going to try to talk about it tonight.
So let's start. It's complicated with the clicker. So let's start with the legends of love and legendary lovers. So we start. So we will talk only about sentimental jewelry in the Western world.
Yes, very good. Thank you so much.
So it's important to highlight that since the beginning. So in the Western world, love is the most important virtue in religion, in Christianism, and also in ancient philosophy. And in Christianism, the most important, there are very many kinds of love, in fact, and in Christianism, charity is probably the most virtuous love, because it's the love of Christ related to mankind. In ancient philosophy, especially in Neoplatonism, it's also a very important virtue. During the Renaissance, a new culture, a mix between Christianism and ancient philosophy, called the Neoplatonism, love had many faces and was personified by the goddess of love, Venus. So Venus is Aphrodite for the Greek, Venus for the Roman, and she personified beauty and love. And in Italy, in Renaissance painting, maybe you know Botticelli. Botticelli, there are two very important paintings by Botticelli, the Birth of Venus and the Primavera, that means the spring. And these two paintings represent two different kinds of love. In the Birth of Venus, Venus is depicted naked on the shell, and she is representing the divine love, the superior love. And in the Primavera, she's dressed and she's pregnant, and she's representing the human love. In the Western world, especially during the Renaissance in Italy, a beautiful woman had to be blonde, blonde and curvy. And in fact, here we have a relation with the gemstones. On the screen, you can see two samples of quartz, colorless quartz with specific inclusions of a mineral called rutile. Rutile is a titanium oxide, and sometimes it crystallizes on the shape of needles with a golden color. And on the market, very often, these quartz are called Venus hair quartz, because there are an evocation of the hair, the beautiful hair of Venus. And we will discover with Paul during this talk that gemstones are very often related to the representation of love and are very important in sentimental jewelry.
Yes, it's really important that this actual quartz is named after Venus. Venus has many attributes. She has the myrtle leaves. She has her blonde hair. She also has doves. Doves are one of her attributes. Venus is always associated with doves because she are you not able to show?
Yeah, I don't know where is the computer, so I'm trying, sorry.
Doves are always attributed with Venus. They represent love. You see the doves pulling her chariot if you look at art from the Renaissance and even before. And doves represent Venus. Why? Because they represent love. Doves stay together their entire lives. They're faithful, a couple. And so this idea of Venus represented by doves permeates the decorative arts, the fine arts, etc. And we chose two examples. On the left, an 18th century jewel, which is actually quite interesting because we know it's a betrothal jewel. Why do we know that? Because there's a knot at the top, a bow. Bows were very popular from the late 17th century all through the 18th and into the 19th century. But there were designers of jewelry at the time who had design books with these bows. And the fact that there's doves really tells us that it's the doves are kissing. I think you can see that. And it's silver, it's rose-cut diamonds set in silver. And the two doves are actually kissing, and they have little ruby eyes. There was a jeweler at the time of the 18th century, Jacques Guay, and in his treatise and his designs, he said, when you see two doves at an altar, it represents marriage. So it was a code at the time. This piece is very beautiful because it's already pierced openwork, which is something that's going to happen to jewelry. And you can see that they're mastering more and more the cutting of the stones. So the codes, on the right, we skip 200 or more years, actually, to Art Nouveau. Art Nouveau was a period of great creativity. Jewelers like René Lalique, they created jewels that didn't care about the value necessarily of the stones. It was more the composition. And in this piece, you see two doves, and they're, of course, showing affection for each other, and they're enameled. Enamel becomes very important in the Art Nouveau period. And that transparent enamel you see in the background, it's like stained glass windows. We call that plique à jour. It was a type of enamel that had its origins in the Middle Ages, but revived by René Lalique in this period. And that pearl, that proverbial pearl, which reminds us of Renaissance jewels. Renaissance jewels always have a pearl hanging down. The Art Nouveau jewelers, they loved the Renaissance. They didn't copy the Renaissance. So the pearl is also a reminder of Venus, because as Marie-Laure said, she's born from the sea. She's born from sea foam, just like a pearl. So whether we're in this more traditional jewelry on the left or a very more avant-garde sculptural jewel on the right, we find doves everywhere.
In fact, the birth of Venus is not as poetic as you said, but we don't tell the truth.
I thought in the Theogony was.
Where is the computer?
I think it's back there.
Ah, okay. Thank you. So,
it's your turn.
I would just would like to talk a little bit about the Venus offspring. Venus had several children, and probably the most famous is Cupid. Cupid is the son she had with Mars, the god of war. And Cupid is the god of love and is the warrior of love. And he has a very strong power. He has the power to make people fall in love because of his arrow, because of his weapon. So he has a bow and he has arrows, and with the arrows, when he touch the heart of people fall in love. And so it's very powerful as a symbol, the arrow. And the arrow becomes the symbol of love, with or without Cupid. On the left, we have a magnificent example of a sentimental jewel that was created probably in Prague at the end of the 16th century, beginning of the 17th century, in the area of the Habsburg court, so related to the emperor. And it's like a shield, and it's centered with a magnificent heart-shaped ruby. And this ruby is surrounded by diamonds. It is crowned with diamonds, and we can recognize two arrows that are piercing the ruby heart, an allusion, of course, of Cupid's arrow. So it's a sentimental jewel with, at the back, the portrait of a man. So this, probably this jewel was given as a gift, as a wedding gift, probably, in this context, especially because of the combination of, so we have the arrow, the heart, and also the combinations of gemstones, of colors. We have diamonds and ruby. Ruby is traditionally a gemstone related to love, various kinds of love. And diamond also, diamond because of its hardness. Diamond, the word diamond stems from the Greek adamas. Adamas means indomitable, invincible, because of its hardness. And in Arabic, it's the same. Almas stems from the same Greek word in fact. Diamond is also related to love because in the Middle Ages, in the lapidaries, the specific treatise written related to gemstones, diamond was mingled with another mineral called magnetite. And because magnetite and diamond, on the very rough shape, have the same octahedral shape, in fact. People thought that diamond was magnetic. That's not true. In nature, natural diamonds are not magnetic at all, but it became the gemstone of attraction because of that. So when the Bears created a famous slogan during the 20th century, making a diamond the most desirable stone and the symbol of love. Diamond is forever. In fact, it's enrooted in a very deep and ancient tradition.
I thought that was a Shirley Bassey song. Diamonds are forever. Sorry, it's a joke. I'm a fan of Shirley Bassey.
So we have another example related to the iconography of Cupid on the right. It's a brooch in the shape of an arrow, late 18th, beginning of 19th century. So it's a very large brooch. This kind of pattern was very popular during the 19th century for sentimental jewelry. And we can recognize also the combination of gemstones. And we have also emeralds. Emeralds are associated with another kind of love. And the emerald became, in the Renaissance, a symbol of Venus. But it's mostly related to virginity and chastity.
Yes, these hair jewelry, this pin on the right, they think it used to be larger and it was probably a hair jewel and it was transformed into a brooch. But the important thing is, as you said, when you see the arrow, people know exactly what you're referring to. So let's talk about another love story. Let's talk about Cupid and Psyche. Cupid and Psyche, Cupid is, of course, the son of Venus and Mars. And there's a very beautiful mortal girl named Psyche. Psyche is so beautiful that Venus gets jealous. Don't forget, Venus is the goddess of beauty, of love. So she sends her son Cupid to make her fall in love with the ugliest man on earth. The only problem is Cupid is clumsy and he pokes himself with his own arrow. Remember that arrow? So it makes him fall in love with beautiful Psyche. There's an oracle that tells Psyche's parents, you must put her on a rock and let the monster carry her away or you'll have bad luck. So Cupid decides to send the wind, the zephyr, to come carry Psyche to his palace, which is inlaid with gemstones, and they become very much in love. The only rule is she cannot look at him. She sees him, well, she doesn't see him. When they're together, it's in the dark. So in the meantime, she decides she's so curious to see what her partner looks like that she takes an oil lamp to look at him. And she accidentally drops hot oil onto Cupid. He wakes up, and he's so angry at her betrayal that he flies away. As you know, Cupid has bird's wings. So this is why we're showing you wings. It makes us think of this story of Cupid and Psyche. The follow-up of the story is that Venus is very angry. She sends Psyche on very difficult tasks. She has to go to the underworld. She has to cross the Styx. And every time somebody helps her. And at the end of the story, it's a happy ending. They join together, and she is made a deity as well. So forever, when we think of Cupid and Psyche, we think of bird's wings for Cupid. And a little later, we'll talk about her wings, which were different. So these two pairs of wings on the left, here we are again in the Art Nouveau period. Beautiful, that beautiful enamel, bright colors, diamonds, very naturalistic. Wings were very popular at the turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th century, for many reasons. We've decided to talk about Psyche, but you might think of other reasons. And on the right is a piece done by Chaumet. It's actually one of the great jewelers on the Place Vendôme. And Chaumet created that piece for a wealthy American woman, Mrs. Vanderbilt, who married a very wealthy man named Whitney. So her name was Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. And he ordered this piece for her in 1910. She was a very talented sculptress. She studied with Rodin. And she's an American lady, heiress, who becomes not so famous with sculpture, but she was quite recognized. And this piece is beautiful. It has diamonds set in platinum, and you also have enamel. That blue is enamel work. And I've seen this piece, the Chaumet exhibition last year. I think you saw it too. It's quite beautiful, and it can be mounted on a tiara. Don't forget, in the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, American ladies wanted to be princesses, so they loved tiaras. So it's a beautiful way of evoking this idea of flight, of wings, of the spirit, and also I can't help but think of Wagner. It reminds me of the Walküre. But in any case, this is our secret love story of Psyche, and which will continue in the next slide, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes, butterflies.
Regarding etymology, psyche in Greek, ancient Greek, is psyche. Psyche means at the same time the soul and butterfly. And in Renaissance painting, psyche usually is represented with butterfly wings. So, of course, butterfly is an allusion to Psyche and to a love story with Cupid. So when you see butterflies in jewelry, you can think about this love story. So butterfly is a very important source of inspiration for jewelry since 18th century, I would say. Very beautiful diamond butterflies in 18th century jewelry. And during 19th century, of course, and 20th century, and butterfly inspired a lot Van Cleef and Arpels. If you went around the exhibition, you will notice that there is a wonderful window filled with different butterflies in Japanese lacquer, in mother of pearl, in wood, and in gemstones, enamel. So it's a very important topic for Van Cleef and Arpels.
Yes, the lightness of the butterfly, this diaphanous creature, which does represent Psyche. And it's this story of the soul searching for immortality, searching for love. And we also have another type of butterfly, which is actually not as pretty, but it's actually, we call it in English, in French they say papillon de nuit. A papillon de nuit is a butterfly of the night, but it's a moth, as you can see. And the moth was also considered to represent the soul. And on the left, you have a very famous family of jewelers from Italy, Castellani. They started out as antique dealers of antiquities. And they were exposed to the discovery of Etruscan jewels in Italy. Etruscan jewels that were from the 8th century before our era. And they were asked to to catalog, and they became so enthralled with the skill of these ancient jewels that they started to copy them. And they became jewelers, and they had an advisor whose name was Prince Caetani. And they actually would reproduce ancient mosaics as well. What you see there is what we call micro-mosaics. Micro-mosaics are related to mosaics, but they're small. And in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, micro-mosaics became extremely popular in Italy. What it entails is you create long glass rods with different colors. We call those smalti sfilati. And you cut them in little pieces. And then there's a support with a cement or a mastic, and the artist has to place each little square just the right way with tweezers to create this beautiful image. And the final step is to polish it with wax. So the Castellanis were so taken in by what we found in Pompeii and in Herculaneum, these mosaics that were in Roman homes. And they decided to start doing reproductions. And so this is a piece that's very interesting because it says psyche, which is the Greek for soul, and it has a moth, which is extremely intricately represented with mosaics, by the way, became popular also because of what we call the Grand Tour. The Grand Tour were originally English aristocrats going all around Europe to the ruins in Italy as far down as Naples, and they would like to purchase something to bring back. So often micro-mosaics have ancient, for example, the Roman Forum represented, the Pantheon, etc. So again, Castellani brings their skill to this beautiful, we call that the archaeological school of jewelry. It spread all the way through Europe. And on the right, you know the expression like a moth to the flame? The moth can't help itself. It's a symbol for being overwhelmed by your passions. And there's actually a line from Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice where Portia, she's this beautiful lady, she's being pursued by lots of men who are bothering her. And she says, oh, hath the flame singed the moth. She's trying to say that they're going to destroy themselves. And on the right, we have, it's a little bit of a trinket, actually. We found in an antique dealer in London. And what's fun is that sentimental jewels don't have to be expensive. They can be a trinket, they can be metal. What's important is the message. And I like this piece as well because you see the moths leading themselves to their death by being burned. And we talked earlier about Cupid. Well, there were lots of emblems of Cupid. There are little images of Cupid that were done by many artists. And one of them has Cupid looking at a flaming candle with all the moths. And it's one of those images taken from these books on the different attitudes of Cupid. I think the saying that goes with it, for one pleasure, 1,000 pains. So again, this idea of being devoured by your passion, it's very sentimental.
Really beautiful, Paul. So Paul said that token of love doesn't have to be expensive or very valuable in terms of material. The most important is love, in fact. So there are also some stories about Cupid. Cupid and honey. Cupid trying to steal some honey from a beehive and being stung by bees. In fact, it's an image of love that can be very sweet, but that can cause strong pains too. So here we have two examples, a very humble pendant in silver with a representation of a bee, and you have the inscription, my honey, for my love, in fact. And an example by Chaumet, created a few years ago. It was a collection related to love called Catch Me If You Love Me. And we can recognize also the bee on this piece.
Yes, the idea of Cupid trying to get the honey, it's repetitive in art. And there's that von Cranach painting, isn't there, from the Renaissance? And you see Cupid, he's crying to Venus, but it hurts, Mom, it hurts so badly. And he says, how can such a small thing cause so much pain? And Venus replies, you're the same as the bees. You're very small, but you cause great pain for people. So I love that story, the way you told it as well, and that the bee reminds us of Cupid and his desires. So we wanted to move on to our second chapter, which is about the garden. Oh, did you lose the batteries? We wanted to talk about the symbolic garden of love. Gardens have always symbolized precious places where we can go to contemplate. We can recreate a universe of beautiful plants, whether we're talking about antiquity, whether we're talking about Islamic gardens. And in the Middle Ages, gardens take on extremely deep meanings. Each flower, each thing in the garden has a very specific message. So we wanted to start talking about the gardens and what they represent and the language of flowers. And our first couple that we wanted to talk about in this section, if you can change to the next.
If I try, sorry.
Thank you so much. I know it's not. We have Romeo and Juliet, of course. Romeo and Juliet, the star-crossed lovers, as we say in English, Shakespeare's most famous work, written and published in 1597, where you have Romeo and Juliet. They're from families that are feuding, and they fall in love anyway, the Capulets and the Montagues. And this is a very important moment in the drama, and it's the collection of Cleef and Arpels, of course, Romeo and Juliet, 100 pieces of high jewelry, unique pieces. And what's interesting is Romeo's giving her a bouquet of flowers with violet-colored sapphires. His breeches are in lacquer, his costume is in lapis, and he's giving Juliet, who's acting very shy, but I think she's very happy to accept this bouquet. So the Romeo and Juliet story, which of course it does have a sad part to it, but what the message overall is that love does prevail. And we wanted to show you, these are very rare. Actually, these figurative pieces of male figures are quite rare in Van Cleef & Arpels history. But if you look in the exhibition and the love section, there's actually a pair of Romeo and Juliet clips from 1951. They're very different style. They're very charming with a lot of polished gold. And so these are more recent, of course, high jewelry pieces, unique pieces from 2019. So what about roses?
So regarding the bouquet of flowers, especially in the 19th century, it was a language, a secret language, and very popular books were published with the secret language of flower. It was like a kind of dictionary, and we had the different flowers described with the various meanings possible. And sometimes, if a man was in love with a woman, he was able to give her a bouquet composed with different flowers with a hidden love message with these flowers. Among all the flowers, probably rose is the queen of flowers. There is a myth at the origin of a rose. The goddess, the nymph, Chloris Flora, goddess of the flowers, discovered the rose, and with the help of various gods like Venus, like Bacchus, like Apollo, Chloris gave birth, in fact, to the rose, became the most beautiful flower in the kingdom of flowers. So in Antiquity, it was a very important flower, and it has always been the case. And during the Middle Ages, there is a novel that was published, very popular at that time, called the Roman de la Rose in French, the Rose novel. I don't know how to translate it.
Yeah, that's fine. Novel of the Rose.
And in this novel, in fact, the rose is the metaphor of the lady the author is in love with. And so we have a description in the first part of a garden. He tries desperately to enter into this garden, and several beautiful poetic symbols.
And Juliet says in Romeo and Juliet, "What's in a name? A rose with any other name would still smell as sweet." This is because they're from warring factions, and she's saying, who cares that you're a Montague and I'm a Capulet? And this masterpiece on the left was part of the Romeo and Juliet collection as well. You have a white rose representing the pureness of Juliet's love with white diamonds, all different cuts. And on the right, you have a red rose with buff top navette mystery set. It's an extremely complex system. Of course, the mystery set was patented in 1933 by Van Cleef & Arpels, but this version is more recent. This is only the 6th or 7th time they've done this. And the red rose represents the passion of Romeo, just like you said. And the red rose actually comes, it can be detached and worn as a necklace. So this beautiful homage to the rose, the Roman de la Rose and Romeo and Juliet, all in this one piece. With beautiful red and white. As you said, the red and the white is very symbolic. It's usually a symbol of love, isn't it?
And in the popular culture, in fact, depending on its color, the rose can signify different kinds of love. The white rose is for the pure love, and the red rose is for passion.
What about orange?
I don't remember about orange.
In France, they have so many meanings for the color. I think orange, I read somewhere, it hides its real message. It's a message of desire, but it's trying to be innocent.
And so, pink? What about pink?
Pink is more innocent as well. Pink is pure, I think.
Okay.
So we go from roses, and we wanted to also talk to you about another flower, which I think daisies. So daisies, in French, the name for daisy is marguerite. So the etymology of the word in French actually comes from from Greek and Latin, the word for pearl, margaritas. In English, daisy, if you think about that word, it's a flower that was called day's eye because it opens in the morning. The daisy represents purity, innocence. It also protects women in childbirth, according to Freya. She's a goddess of the Nordic culture. And also a daisy, if you think about it, I've learned this from my friends who are gardeners, The daisy is actually a composition of many flowers, the center and the petals, the white and the yellow. So it's actually also represents true love. And we wanted to show you these two pieces on the left in French. Do you know the daisy game? She loves me not, she loves me. The French have a much more complicated version. There's 6 possibilities. 5 are positive, and the only one negative. She loves me a little, she loves me a lot, she loves me passionately, she loves me to craziness, and then not at all. And on the left, we have a very interesting jewel designed by a very important designer named Grasset for Weber. It's a Art Nouveau jewel. And you can see the lady, her hair is a little bit troublesome. Is she nice? Is she going to kiss me? Or is something else going to happen? And on that plaque, you see the saying of the French daisy game. What I find interesting is on the bottom, if you look, it says pas du tout. That means not at all. So I find it funny that in this piece, you see the not at all more, although you do have 5 positive possibilities. So it's set with cabochon gemstones, there's topaz and sapphires. And on the right, we have a real love symbol. It's a real love jewel. It was given to Grace Kelly. As you know, Grace Kelly, she was the queen of Hollywood, 1956, with 2 Oscars, and she's presenting 4 films. She goes to the Cannes Film Festival, and she's invited to Monaco for an interview with Prince Rainier. Monaco, is that Morocco? Americans, we didn't know what Monaco was. So she goes to Monaco, and she waits for hours, and she's annoyed. And he shows up, and of course, it's love at first sight, and she stayed 8 hours. And they're married but a year later. It was a Hollywood wedding made in heaven, and she becomes Princess Grace of Monaco. But what's interesting is this piece was given to her, we're not even quite sure by whom. It's a piece that was made by Van Cleef and Arpels, but it was the eve of her wedding, and you can imagine maybe she was playing the daisy game in her head. Does he love me? He loves me not, he loves me. And this piece was so naturalistic, very typical of Van Cleef and Arpels' rendition of nature, asymmetry, those prong-set sapphires in the middle that look very naturalistic, and platinum. And she loved this piece. We know that she loved him because she wore this piece in one of her last portraits before her untimely death. She was wearing it on her chest. So it's a very moving piece for many reasons, because they were great friends and clients of Van Cleef and Arpels, but it is a love story that we all like to think about. One of the most beautiful women from Hollywood, I think. But I've always been a fan, so I'm not very objective. So I think we should also talk about, what's a forget-me-not?
Sorry, it's difficult.
Do you want to try?
The clicker, I don't know why. Huh? So let's talk about another flower. Today, I don't think many people know it, but it was a very popular flower, especially during the 19th century. Its name is Forget-Me-Not, so it's a very beautiful name. The root of this name is a legend, the legend of a knight and a beloved lady. And it was the knight and the lady were walking around along a river, and at one moment he saw a beautiful blue flower on the banks of a river, and trying to catch the flower to give it to his beloved. Unfortunately, with the weight of the armor, he fell into the water. And before drowning, he told her, "Don't forget me." So it's a very sad story, and it gave the name to the flower, Forget-Me-Not. And in 19th century sentimental jewelry, it's probably the most spread flower. Usually it is a 5-petal flower set with turquoise cabochon, as you can see on the screen. And here we have, it's an emblematic token of love with the 2 hands holding the flower as it's like a gift, in fact. It's a very strong message of love.
Yes, Mia Sotis in French and Forget-Me-Not in English. There's a whole case in the exhibition Time, Nature, and Love, because it's a very popular flower also during the war years in the late 30s and 40s, because it was a flower of remembrance. And there's many examples of Van Cleef and Arpels. And on the left, you have this beautiful one-of-a-kind dial, Amour Charms watch, which has little myosotis, little forget-me-nots on enamel painted dial. And you also have cyclamen, which are painted on mother of pearl. These watches are one of a kind. Each dial is done with the craftsmanship, which you can see, which is quite amazing. Now, forget-me-not works better in English, but our next flower is a flower that it works better in, oh, what did I do?
It's not you, I don't know.
I made it worse.
What happens.
The next flower actually works better in French because it's called a pansy. But where does pansy come from? Pansy comes from an old French expression. Well, it's actually the verb, it means to think, penser. And penser also with an accent and is also an extra E. It's the past participle for the word to think, and also it represents the word for a thought. And we believe it comes from the 15th century, and the etymology might be from a Latin word called pendare, which means to contemplate. So it's again a flower that you're telling someone you're thinking of them. And the pansy is actually one of the flowers that was very popular in Victorian England. As Marie-Laure said, you weren't allowed to express your feelings. I'm talking about England from 1830 to 1900. You weren't allowed to express your feelings. It wasn't well looked upon. So men would use the language of flowers. So one of the flowers that they would use was the pansy, and they would hide a pansy with a bunch of herbs around it in a doily, and it was called a tussie-mussy. And they would give it to a woman, and she would discover the pansy when she was presumably home, and he was telling her that he was thinking of her. And we just have two examples, a picture frame, of course. What better way to remember someone than a photo with enameled pansies. And on the right, a beautiful watch by Chaumet. Again, great enamel work. We call that guilloché enamel, when you engrave on the gold those beautiful patterns. And enamel is actually a glass-based paste. And when you place it on the metal and you fire it, it becomes translucent. So with the pansy, very naturalistic pansy. And there's also natural pearls. We talked about pearls also represent purity and love. So this piece is very in line with Romanticism. And Chaumet's forefather was actually called Morel. And before that was Faussin. And Morel especially was a great jeweler during the Romantic period and who developed these beautiful techniques. Sorry.
So, this is a brooch from the end of the Middle Ages representing a couple into a garden. So you can recognize the two figures represented with enamel, and around we have a kind of garland with leaves, but enameled in green. And during the Middle Ages, the garden is a special place for young lovers, for the new loves. And here it's a betrothal or a wedding gift representing these two young lovers. We have a combination of gemstone that is typical also for sentimental jewelry. So diamond, a red gemstone, that is probably a spinel. And pearls, always this combination of colors and symbolism related to gemstones that was very, very strong during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance.
And the garden of love, again, we're in our garden. The actual, if you look carefully at that work, that enamel work, I don't have the clicker.
Ah. Okay.
If you look carefully at that enamel work, we call that encrusted enamel, or ronde de bosse in French, the texture of her hat, the texture of their clothing. And Milo, isn't this one of the earliest examples of a diamond that we know of in medieval jewelry? That point top diamond.
In fact, here
it's
we have a twin.
It's when it just starts to come in Europe, right?
Exactly in between the two figures, we have a diamond in a shape of a triangle. It's a rough diamond In fact, diamond cutting, I'm sorry, I'm talking about another topic, but diamond is the gemstone of love, so we are not so outside the topic. Diamond cutting was invented at the end of the Middle Ages in the 14th century. And before, diamonds were set under their rough shape, but sometimes, even in the 15th century, we still find rough diamonds set on pieces of jewelry.
So let's go to our third chapter, shall we? The secret language of love. We talked about the secret language of flowers, but let's talk about other symbols. This one is pretty obvious, right? The stylized heart. We don't really know. In Antiquity, you see the stylized heart on Greek vases. It's actually ivy leaves. Ivy leaves evolve into a heart. Also, Christianity plays a big role in that with the heart of Jesus. So this stylized heart, we recognize it immediately. And on the left, Tiffany became world famous, of course, for this heart. They created the first heart charm in 1889, probably because of the fad of charms with Queen Victoria. And on the right, you have a very bright jewel, American jeweler named Paul Flatto. And he designed this jewel with a lady, was a very important, stylish American lady named Millicent Rogers. She was an oil heiress. She became one of the most beautiful, she wasn't beautiful in the plastic sense, but one of the most elegant women. She was on the cover of magazines, and she designed this jewel with Paul Flatto. And it's a puffy heart. She called it her puffy heart. It's set with 134 rubies and little beads of enamel, calibre sapphires, the blue, and the arrow. Remember Cupid's arrow? And this saying in Latin, verbum caro, it can be loosely translated as thinking words to a loved one. She loved this jewel very much. She was wearing it in many photos. So, of course, the heart has its ways. The heart has its reasons, this beautiful quote from Blaise Pascal. There's other types of
I understand something else when I see verbum caro.
Oh, I thought that's what I was told.
The word made flesh.
Oh,
to me, it's this translation.
Oh, okay.
It's related to love too.
Yeah.
So
we know that she actually had a Latin American. Her second husband was a Argentinian, and so she might have been inspired by, like you said, those hearts you see in Christian iconography or charms from South America. So what about this more realistic heart?
It's very rare in jewelry. Usually, heart is a very stylized shape. But sometimes we can find examples that are very close to the anatomical art. But it's very rare. The drawing on the left by Mellerio is really a unique example. We don't know any other. Maybe there are, but we don't know any other. And in contemporary jewelry, sometimes jewelers are inspired by anatomy. I don't know what you think about it.
It's actually interesting because the piece on the left, the Mellerio, it's slightly stylized, but you can see the actual anatomy of the heart. You're quite right. So we have this idea of giving a piece of oneself. On the right, it's a little surprising to us today, but it's hair jewelry. The bracelet is made of braided hair. Hair jewelry existed since the 17th century, but it takes on a whole new meaning in the late 18th and the 19th century during the Romantic period. It became a cottage industry. Young women from certain background, they would weave the hair in their home. Giving your hair was the most intimate and most moving thing you could do in those days. So this piece on the right from the Second Empire, the second part of the 19th century with somebody's initials, the whole bracelet is made of braided hair and there's hair under that initial. And on the left is a more modern version. We have hair, of course, but you can also give your fingerprint. The fingerprint is representing I, the heart is love, and you. So on the internet, you can send in your fingerprint and you can get this jewel made. So we go from hair, often there was blood, which is a little bit gruesome, but they would put their loved one's blood in their ring. And here we have a fingerprint. So we go from anatomy to something very high tech.
Regarding the hair, in fact, the hair that was used was hair of the children,
exactly.
Hair of the
people
husband, hair of the friends.
Thank you, that's very important.
And sometimes also people created jewelry with teeth, especially the teeth of the children.
Yes, that was in
the
Victorian
19th century
and
in France too. But I think it's at the Victoria and Albert Museum or in the Royal Collection, there is a brooch belonging to it belonged to the Queen Victoria, set with the teeth of her first daughter.
So sentimental jewels the hair is actually considered extremely... Okay, we have another type of message, which we call a rebus. A rebus is when you have pictograms or sounds that when you read them, it makes a phrase. So in the middle, we have may. What do you see under the may? I. If you go down in the middle, see you. And what is the image? Home, my dear. So it's a not so discreet way, but in Victorian England to say something of that nature. And you can be very hidden as well. On the right, you have 4 letters. In French, L-A-C-D, L-A-C-D. If you say that in French, it means she surrendered. She surrendered to her love. And in the middle, it's mother of pearl and diamonds. In the middle, it says love is protecting her. And on the left, it's quite obvious. It says, I will cover you with 1,000 kisses. So whether it's a hidden rebus or more obvious when that enameled piece on the left, these messages we think are related to medieval rings found in France, and we call those poésies, the little messages that were in sentimental jewels during the Middle Ages. Diana Scarisbrooke, a great jewelry historian, is convinced that the root of these is these poésies. So what is acrostics?
So acrostic jewelry was very popular in the 19th century. In this kind of jewelry, the gemstones were used not for their color, not for their beauty, but for their name. And the jewelers used the first letter of the name of the gemstone to create a message. So on the left, it's quite simple, and it's written inside the bangle. Oh, it's a ring? No, it's a bangle. We have a diamond, an emerald, an amethyst, and a ruby. D for diamond, E for emerald, A for amethyst, and R for ruby, dear. And on the right, it's a pendant. This kind of pendant was very popular in the 19th century. So it's a locket with a key. Locket, key, padlocks also are obvious symbols of love, of course. And there are several gemstones set on this pendant, forming the word regard. So we have a ruby, emerald, garnet, amethyst, a ruby, and diamond.
So hidden messages with the first letter of the name of each stone.
I like this kind of jewelry.
Me too.
You can hide very private messages like this.
We think that the ancestor of Chaumet-Nito created these for Napoleon, and they actually have a new launch. They've launched a new version of it. Yes, go ahead. So one of the famous love stories, again, this lover's eye is actually a love gift. It's an eye which is quite anonymous. And the people who started this trend are the Prince of Wales, the future, well, he's George IV here, King of England, and a lady, Mary Fitzherbert. When George IV was a young man, he fell in love with this lady on the right. She was Catholic, she was divorced twice. It was impossible. He knew that very well. But he begged her to marry him, and she knew very well that it wasn't possible, so she fled to the continent. So he sent her a love letter, many love letters, please come back. And in one of the letters, he sent her one of these miniatures of his eye. He was friends with a miniaturist named Richard Causeway. So it was a secret way that she could wear part of him. So guess what? She came back, and she did marry him, but in secret. It had to be a secret wedding. And the point of the story is they gave each other these lovers' eyes. And he wanted to be buried with his lover eye. For political reasons, they had to be separated. They didn't live their life together. But they both wore these lover's eyes, and they became a huge fad all the way through England and Prussia. And this one has a little tear, so you can imagine that it might be in memory of somebody. So the idea of anonymous, nobody knows your love secrets except for the couple. So what about sentiment? Why do we have sentimental jewels? Do we think it still continues? I think so.
Of course, love is stronger than death, and in the 19th century, this kind of jewelry, mourning jewelry, was very popular. And we have 2 examples here, a ring in the shape of a snake with black enamel. The snake is a symbol of eternity, as you can see. And on the right, it's a very moving pendant created with hair. It's a miniature painted with powder of hair mixed with a binder. With, I think it's ivory behind the background. And we have a beacon. It's a love beacon with a message of love on it. And a woman in the attitude of melancholy is beside this beacon under a tree. In French, we call it a saule pleureur, a weeping tree.
Weeping willow.
Exactly.
Very typical of mourning jewelry, isn't it?
Absolutely. So it's in everything is made with hair, the hair of a loved one who died, unfortunately.
So we come full circle with our story of love with Romeo and Juliet. This is the balcony scene, the famous scene when she's singing, she's calling out to Romeo, 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 where art thou, Romeo? And the Maison Van Cleef does a beautiful rendition with the ivy coming down with hessonite garnets and emeralds, this one-of-a-kind clip. And our star-crossed lovers are represented on the back of the clip where you can actually see them embracing. So this idea of love, whether it's a couple or whether it's someone, sentimental jewels can also, like Marie-Laure told us, to remember someone who's passed. It can be passion, it can be innocent love, it can be many different kinds. And it can also, doesn't have to be diamonds and rubies and emeralds. It can be made of tin, it can be made of aluminum, as we saw. So it's very interesting.
Made of hair.
Of hair. And we wanted to just wonder, do we think that sentimental jewels still exist? I think they do. Mm-hmm. They become very popular, many of the Maisons, and even online, if you look, you'll see many sentimental jewels.
They are timeless.
So we're really at the end of our trip tonight. We hope that you enjoyed it. We'd like to take time for questions if you have any. This is our colleagues were doing this tonight, so it's a little late for you to tune in. We were going to announce it. But Milo and I will be doing an online talk, which you can sign up for free. You go on our website or our Instagram, and you watch it on your phone. You can be home cooking your dinner, watch us on your iPhone, watch us on your computer. You can send in chats during the talks, and we're going to be talking about
precious ornamental gemstones.
Yes, what was precious in antiquity? What was precious? It wasn't like today where we talk about rubies, emeralds, diamonds, sapphires. There were other criteria for what made a precious stone, the color. So tune in to see us. I can't remember April
the 13th.
If you'd like to watch us again. And we'd love to take your questions if you have time or patience. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much for your attention.
One of these mics can move if you want to speak. Don't be shy.
Are there questions? No? Well.
Thank you. Regarding the wings, the one by Chaumet, it was here presented last year in the Chaumet Gallery in Riyadh. Yes, and my question is, I have seen many pictures for Her Royal Highness Sheikha Moza, the wife of the Royal of Qatar. She was wearing it in her abaya. Right? It's very small like this. It's very beautiful. So my question is, if a royal is buying this kind of pieces, are they belong to them? Or actually it belongs to the museum or belong to the Chaumet itself?
The pieces we showed belong to Chaumet. They remain in the Chaumet patrimony, in fact.
Thank you for your question. I knew there'd be questions. It's like in school, nobody wants to ask the first question.
Thank you so much. Actually, during the whole lecture, I was thinking about your words, but I was also looking at your brooches. Could you please tell a little bit more about it? Because now I'm reading a book about Madeleine Albright and her brooches. So I'm very excited and curious about it. But thank you so much. I learned so much today, and I see how many hidden messages we actually have in the jewelry that if we don't know, we cannot read them. But then you see the whole new layer of depth. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your question. Of course, the book of Madeleine Albright, who is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs in the US. Is that this title exactly?
Secretary of State.
Sorry,
but
Secretary
but
of
it's
State.
the same function. It's the same
It's
function.
the same function.
Yes.
So she collected brooches, and she always chose the brooches depending on the situation, depending on the moment. And she wrote this book, Read My Pins, that is really interesting. And about my brooches, there are Van Cleef & Arpels brooches from the 1960s. And the little bull, you have the same in the exhibition, and this is an elephant. It was a new collection in the 1960s. In fact, it began in the 1950s.
54.
You are
54.
better than me about history of Van Cleef & Arpels. It was a collection of animal brooches in a new concept of jewelry called La Boutique. So it was not unique piece. They did several pieces, and the most famous, I think, is the little lion and the winking cat. I don't know if you know these brooches. There are several in the exhibition that are very cute. They are inspired by cartoons, in fact. So I don't have jewelry with flowers or things like that. So. It was
they're quite rare now. There's a newer collection, of course, the Lucky Animals, which is done with hard stones and perlé. But these little sculptural animals, they've become extremely popular. They became popular with Sophia Loren, Grace Kelly back then, and now great collectors and people with a lot of style like My Law.
Thank you, Paul. But if you are looking for this kind of pieces, at Van Cleef & Arpels, there is a part of Van Cleef called Heritage, and they retail in the stores vintage pieces.
Exactly, that's a good point.
And in Riyadh too. Other questions?
I see another one in the back. He has a mic, I think.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Hello. So actually, I have a two-part question. The first one is about the Cupid and the Psyche story. I feel like the oil lantern is a very important part. Was it ever used in jewelry as well, or was it just the wings?
That's a good question. Perhaps in charms. I'm thinking of little...
In charms, yes, maybe.
You know how
right.
charm jewelry, there's often little objects? So I've never seen one, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was, the oil lamp was used as a charm.
Yeah, perhaps like the thing that broke them.
Yeah.
Or caused the problem.
Exactly.
The other question is, I see it in a lot of vintage jewelry. It's a heart that's on fire with a lot of knives or swords going through it, and the hand that grabs a heart. Is it like...
It sounds like it's a sentimental jewel, doesn't it? The pain maybe of love, and the hand is the hand of love. I've never seen a jewel quite that explicit. It has swords?
It's a sword.
It's like a heart on fire.
It's the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Sorry. In fact, there is a kind of jewelry that was created in Portugal in the 18th century to symbolize a new Christian order named the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And we have the heart and the flames, and usually it's surmounted by the cross. And sometimes we can recognize the thorn crown of Christ that is around the heart.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Thank you, first of all, very much for the talk. It's my first time coming to a talk about jewelry, so it was very informative. I noticed that jewelry is usually, let's say, made of things that are precious, maybe everlasting, rare. What else, especially in modern, let's say, jewelry, in your opinion, would be everlasting and precious, just like the gems that are used in the past? Or, for example, as you suggested in the last slide, the colors. what would be, in the modern view, regarded as precious? Especially taken that now we're moving a lot away from the physical and maybe into the virtual. Do you have any thoughts on that? Or is it too complicated a question?
And I think it's preciousness is very relative, and the notion of value also.
Exactly.
Because a value, of course, you have financial value, but you have affective value. There are many kinds of value. So depending on the way you consider jewelry, for some people jewelry is just an investment, financial investment. But for other people, it's the story of the family, it's a love story.
Yeah. Also, if you look at contemporary creators these days, you'll find people making jewelry out of different things, out of resin, out of film, the celluloid film. If you look at there was a wonderful exhibition in Paris, historic exhibition in 2017 called Medusa, and it had 400 pieces of jewelry, and one of the themes was, where's the value? Is it the diamonds? Is it, like Marie-Laure said, because I think if you explore into contemporary creations, you're going to find a lot of different materials. People are using they're using porcelain, plastic, stuffed animals. I mean, you name it. If, like you said, if the notion of precious is it's subjective, it's not necessarily because it's a diamond.
And jewelry is art, so you can't forget that. It's not only a product that we sell. Jewelry is more than that. So it's the value to me is related to the artistic dimension.
Exactly, and the stories. This is one thing we find at l'école over and over. People start telling us the stories. Oh, this is what my grandmother gave me. This was when I turned this age. You know, it's very, the value is everywhere. But I think you're right, there are new materials. And if you look at contemporary creations, you'll find a lot of inspiration.
Yeah, and it also got me thinking about reusing the material that's sustainable, yes, so that your grandma can pass it on to...
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're
Recycling.
welcome. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, it's a very interesting question.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're just so pleased to be here, but I think we're going to say goodbye for now. If you have any questions, keep in touch with us on our Instagram, on our handle. And please come back if you're interested tomorrow night. We'll be doing one last session on flora in the art of jewelry. Mm-hmm. And we'd like to thank the museum yet again, Van Cleef and Arpels, and you, and the exhibition Time, Nature, and Love. And thank you, Marie-Laure. It was very enjoyable.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you very much for your attention. Have a good evening.
See you next time.